All right, off camera, I was telling Mr. Hillstrom about Waka Waka with Shakira. All right, makes my elbows sweat, but that's something else. All right, Africa's big. What are we talking about, Sam? 58 countries?
Something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So quite a few countries. Conference of Berlin, 1884, 85.
I was going 83, but yeah,
83,
right in there.
okay.
Yeah.
The cousins, all the royal cousins in Europe got together and they carved it up. All right, not paying any attention to religion, ethnicity, economics. They just made their own puzzle, and Africa's going through that today. It's really fascinating the civilizations that they had, but then when the Europeans came, it just really screwed things up. They in some ways were so far ahead of us, but when it came to gunpowder and guns, they weren't, and that was the factor. All right, so let's talk about population first. You've got to know that this is sub-Saharan Africa, and it's very populated, and the population is growing because you've got the mentality of one. Half of my kids are going to die, so I've got to have a lot, and because I need two males to take care of me when I'm old. All right, we're farmers, so I need hands on the farm. So that's the mentality that we've got to change, because they're emerging economies in some places. We call these, well, it won't be on the test, but we had Asian tigers. Here we're talking about African lions, emerging economies. They have grocery stores. All right, the Portuguese were the first to come and really kind of stumbled on the whole idea of slavery here and over here. They had ports on both sides. And they were like, dang, we can make money off this. And then the Dutch get involved, the English get involved. And for North America and South America, this is where our slaves came from. Portuguese down here, Dutch and English over here. And we're talking about a lot of different ethnicities, but why so much here? They were farmers, they were protein eaters. Slaves over here that they're getting are completely different, and that's going into the Muslim world, but they weren't farmers like they were over here. We learned a lot from these guys, how to grow rice, a lot of different methods of farming. Okay, so population-wise, not as populated up north where they are. It's in river valleys, okay, because you need water, but you can't do it where there's a lot of sand and a lot of desert.
You talk about 95% of Egypt's population is right along the Nile.
Right along the Nile River. Okay. All right. Migration. Okay. Obviously, 12.5 million slaves were brought over to North and South America. The vast majority going to the Caribbean islands and South America to grow sugarcane, Brazil. All right. We got about 400,000 out of that in the United States. Migration. People are wanting to leave and go to Europe to work, or the United States, and we said that a lot of times they go to their former colonial masters. As much as I hate to admit it, as I've told you, where the British were, they're doing better because the British had a system of actually teaching the locals how to govern. It's like, all right, you run the post office, okay, all the menial jobs. But then when the British left, at least they had some experience. The really bad places are where the Belgians were. They were the worst. They just came in, and if you didn't pick your quota of rubber that day, they chopped off your arm. That's how brutal they were. And they had no chance of any kind of self-governing. So these are the problem areas of today where there were those type of colonial masters. All right.
Migration-wise, remember forced migration. We talked about African slaves being brought to the Americas. That's international migration. Over here, you're going to have interregional or even intra-regional. All the problems happening in Sudan and South Sudan. Refugees are leaving, or remember we said they're internally displaced people if they're not quite getting outside of the country. Down here, Democratic Republic of Congo, there's still a lot of strife. Remember, there's how many different ethnicities, how many different languages there are represented on this continent. And down here, they're actually, we talked a little bit about modern day issues. They're forcing people to mine, is it lithium? Is that what they're getting for the batteries?
Cobalt.
They're mining the cobalt, and then they're somehow, creating the lithium for our iWatches and our iPhones from that. But you guys should look up videos on, the basically slavery that's still taking place there.
Okay.
Want to go to languages?
Yeah, so we've got Arabic up north, all right. Niger Congo will be the big one in the south. And then, Austronesian that you'll see in places. Those are the biggies to know. They could give you something like, a map like Sudan or Nigeria, 75 languages, over 100 languages with the different ethnic groups, and how the British really didn't think about that. So let's talk about those two countries if they focused on them. And it could be any country, but let's just talk about this. Nigeria, where the British were, a lot more English is spoken, a lot more democracy and capitalism, okay, Christianity. Whereas up north, this is where the Arab trade routes were, so they're Muslim, all right? It's not as densely populated. It's more agricultural, so there's a divide, like we talked about Belgium. Sudan, you have this Muslim north because of the Arab traders. You have a Christian south. This has been Christian since the 3rd or 4th century, and then also the British are going to come. Animist in the east, where they kept their religions of that they've had for thousands of years. And then when they had a drought up here, the government just gave machetes to the people and said, go get it. And you had, one estimate is 5 million people were killed in your lifetime. Okay.
Maybe a South Africa question. Remember Trevor Noah, and there's like 11 different languages that are spoken down here. I don't know how many he speaks, but quite a few.
Yeah.
And you might get an apartheid question where they talk about, how are the Dutch able to divide them up? Well, different languages, you can pit tribes against each other. Okay. I don't want to jump too far forward. Are we at language? Okay. Yeah. So very linguistically diverse. I'm kind of generalizing. I want to generalize a little bit because I want you guys to be thinking about that depending on what question they throw to you. It develops into like 10 different homelands, all based on race, right? We said there's racism here in the United States, and there was segregation, but it was not as harsh as it was down here in South Africa, and it lasted a lot longer. And we had talked about, we still continue to see those impacts. Racism, once it goes away, it doesn't actually go away. You still have all these impoverished areas. You still have ethnic groups still clustering in the same areas. You tend to find impoverished people, in that cycle of poverty. It's tough to get out of it. Okay. What else? Religion-wise, we talked about there's a lot of Christianity sprinkled throughout Africa because of missionaries. We talked about this being mostly Muslim up here. Okay. And then you're going to have a lot of what we I guess, animistic religions or sort of native religions that are maybe even intermixed with some of those, Muslim and Christianity religions.
The one thing they might bring up is since 1900, it's become more Arab and more Christian as it got colonized, and so that would be interesting. Yeah.
Also remember, landlocked states. Okay, we talked about shapes of states. That's not going to be as important as knowing. The shapes are important, but only in the sense that where are they related towards resources. Some don't think they're going into shapes of states too much. Okay.
Alrighty. Okay. Subsistence agriculture for your agriculture component. Okay. Let's go to South America. All right. Wow, we're on landlocked. Bolivia and Paraguay are the landlocked countries. They have a hard time economically because everybody charges them to get their goods out and in. Very Catholic because it was settled by the Spanish and the Portuguese. And this is kind of a fun story. The Spanish and Portuguese, were taking over the world, and they were fighting with each other, and the Pope says, whoa, let's have a meeting. And so he divided the world in half and said, this belongs to Portugal, and this belongs to Spain. But really, this is all Amazon interior. The Spanish never got there. So Brazil became a Portuguese country, and the rest is, Spanish settled. What's interesting religion-wise is about 10% evangelical Christian now. you start seeing a foothold in Mexico, Central America, South America, but it's still predominantly Catholic, still predominantly Spanish speaking and Portuguese. Okay.
Population?
Yeah, well, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, population clusters. We didn't talk about forward capital on the last one, but in Nigeria, they have that forward capital way that they move the capital to the interior. They do the same thing down here. Was it Rio or is it Sao Paulo?
So, go ahead.
In terms of what?
The
Sao
former
Paulo.
capital was Sao Paulo?
Sao Paulo.
Yeah.
Okay. But Rio was the spot where everybody came in and
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
their biggest
they
industrial
partied.
city.
Okay. All right. So this was beaches. We talked about ethnic distribution. I'm kind of jumping all over the place in terms of themes here, but ethnically, we talked about there's a lot of rich white people here. Part of the idea of moving the capital is that's where jobs are going to go. That's the seat of government. And people tend to follow. And so they wanted to forward capital. That idea, if you get that on the test, they're trying to develop in a less developed area. Right, and that tended to be what happened, and so you have a lot more ethnic and racial mixing,
Yeah.
right?
Also, just that there's a lot of tribes that are still within the Amazon that don't see a lot of contact from the government, and I'm not sure how respectful the Brazilian government is of those tribes, but
Not very.
yeah,
And those guys are going to be like the interior here.
yeah,
We said the thing that always throws me off is the Indian population that's up here. That always trips me out.
From India.
From India,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. Because remember we said that this was Portugal, and then it was Dutch, and then the Dutch gave it to the British, and the British were colonizing India, so they actually there's actually an Indian population there.
Yeah.
Like Indian from India, thank you for.
Yeah.
Speaking of which,
Yeah.
there's a pretty significant Japanese population in Peru. I don't know why, but
Well, when Japanese settlers were coming to the United States, they were also coming to Peru. They actually had a president 20 years ago with a Japanese name. And as you're here, you're going to see Europeans. Argentina and Uruguay, say it for me correctly.
what do you mean?
I say Uruguay, you say
Uruguay?
Uruguay. Okay, these are very much more European, whereas more mestizo up north.
Remember your physical geography too. The Andes Mountains. Not where they make the Andes candies, but it's where the really high mountains are, right? The Atacama Desert here is very dry. All of this area, it's tough to develop that. We're talking about population centers earlier, and I kind of skipped around a little bit, but Brasilia, coastal regions are gonna have more people.
And
I don't know if we
it's where slavery was, that's where they're going to be dominated by African Americans.
Right.
Okay, and remember, this is America, South America. Black people in South America are African Americans too. Okay, people in Africa are Africans.
I think it was actually, this is where the Indian population was in Guyana.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't over here. It was up here in Guyana. And then Venezuela, I don't know. You think they'll get a Venezuela question? That'd be pretty modern.
Shoo.
Lots of
Yeah.
oil there.
Oil-rich country, communist, or trying to be more socialist than communist, but it's a disaster. Because if you take the money away from rich people, which I might agree, no, it's a bad idea. All right, because if you take the money away from the rich people, then the rich people have no incentive to make more money. All right, it's intriguing thought, but it's a really bad idea. And now that it's everybody's common, it's pretty poor, it's pretty bad.
They probably won't give you a Central American question, but if they did, just some generalizations. Costa Rica is very stable. They have one of the highest literacy rates in all of the Americas, actually. Panama down here, it gets less developed until you get close to the Panama Canal. That's a major shipping area. Once you get up here into Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, now we're talking about serious political instability, right?
Drug wars.
There are drug wars, and the cartels, right, are in charge. So instead of having Donald Trump in charge, they have the local cartel, okay, that's in charge and enforcing things.
And as I've mentioned before earlier, I hate it. Why is Costa Rica so competent? They were British, right?
Well, yeah, and they just put all of their money or all of their resources into tourism.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, they had some good training.
Ecotourism.
Okay. Alrighty.